What about the government's never-ending, increasing, accelerating debt? How does this help that?
Well, would you regard 120 years as the long term?
Well, for capitalism, for modern economy.
For any person alive today, is 120 years seem like a long term to you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Over the last 120 years, the average surplus of the American government has been minus 2.4% of GDP. Mm-hmm. In other words, a deficit, 2.4% of GDP every year. If you take out the First and Second World War, it's about 2.2% of GDP. So for 120 years, America's been been spending 2% more than it gets back in taxation every year. Now, that, according to most the Austrian-style economists, would call rampant inflation. What's the rate of inflation today? I'm making empirical points here. It's been doing it for over a century, and that's only because I've only got recorded data going back to 1901 from the White House data. Yeah. So it's successfully doing this for an enormous length of time. Why can it do it? The reason is whatever it's doing about its impact on the value of the American dollar versus gold, or the American dollar versus the euro, and so on and so forth, within its own province, which is the United States of America, government money is accepted as full payment of anything somebody wants to buy.
Sure.
Okay. Now, that means that gives it a capacity to use its money creation capability as much as it wants to. Now, what about this 2.4%, 2.2% figure I'm working on? If you look at that and you say, well, what's the rate of growth of the economy in nominal terms on average over that whole century? It's been about of the order of 5 and 6% of GDP, 5 to 6% growth rate per year. If you divide that growth rate by the average of the turnover of money, wham, you get the 2.2% figure I'm talking about. In other words, what the government's been doing, even though it's been trying to resist doing this with the whole focus upon, what they call sound finance, trying to only spend as much as you tax. What it's been doing is creating the extra money supply that the economy needs to grow. Mm-hmm. Even it's been trying to resist it. Now, once we understand that's what the major function the government has is to create the money that we use to make capitalism work. If we say that's what it does, then it's a question of what's the right rate of growth of that money supply over time. And it happens to be the effective rate of change of the nominal GDP divided by the velocity of circulation of money. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it can do it. And of course, the government services its debt by making accounting entries at the Federal Reserve. And you look at all the, when the government issues bonds and they need to be serviced, the servicing is done by entries between the Treasury and the Federal Reserve. Now, is the Federal Reserve going to run out of computer digits?
No, never.
Okay, so this is the thing. It's practically possible. It's not a case of whether it's feasible or not feasible. And this was actually understood at the end of the Second World War by, I've forgotten his name right now, unfortunately, I need to look it up, but I think it was Eccles, the then Federal Reserve chairman. Yeah, because he said, well, look at what we did during the Second World War. We financed a change in government spending, which produced all the military gear that helped subdue the Nazis and subdued the imperial ambitions Japan had at the time. We produced all that by effectively accounting entries. And therefore, there's no limit on the government's capacity to create money. It's how that money is used that matters. What are the impact on the level of employment, rate of inflation, value of the currency, et cetera, et cetera. And they said what we should do is using that power sensibly. And if only we'd followed on from Eccles' insights, we might not be having this conversation. We might equally not be having had a financial crisis 10 years ago.
Yeah, well, that's often the case, right? It's often the case. So the problem, though, of ever increasing credit, what about the fact that interest rates are going up? The government's got to monetize more of this debt, right?
And the government, the interest rates are one of those ethereal realities of capitalism. Actually, Marx said decades ago, a century and a half ago, that there was no solid foundation for the rate of interest. One of these things that can go up and down without limit. And in fact, frankly, is frankly right. But the Federal Reserve can afford to finance all of that. Its what is the impact of that on the level of employment in the country, the level of inflation, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the issues that matter. It's not going to have a problem in financing it because, again, as I said, it's accounting entries. Only if they could run out of computers, zeros in a computer, zeros and ones in a computer, would they run out of the capacity to finance it. It's whether that's leading to more or less productive capacity in the economy, whether it's leading to more or less educated workforce, healthy or less healthy people. Those are the questions that matter, not the practicality of whether it can or cannot do it.
So you're telling me basically the deficit doesn't matter?
The deficit doesn't have to be zero. Not saying it doesn't matter, but the ideal level is not zero. The ideal level is the rate of growth, nominal growth of the GDP divided by the velocity of money. Now that's of the order, when you talk about a rate of inflation which people are comfortable with, which is something of the order of 2 to 4%. Nobody seems to worry about an inflation rate at that level. It's when you get into the 6 and 8 and 10% and 20% levels that people start to freak, and justifiably, because the basis of our monetary transactions is being undermined all the time. But if you look at a rate of growth of the nominal GDP of, say, the price level of 2 to 3%, let's say, and real GDP per head of about 2 to 3%, then you need a rate of growth of the money supply of about 3%, because that's roughly 6% divided by 2 for the turnover of the rate of turnover of money when the economy is in a healthy state, which of course at the moment it is not.
Yeah.